and then I'll formally start the meeting. And I also might mention that Commissioner Williams has just joined us. Hi, Jay. How are you doing?
All right, you're live.
I'd like to welcome all of our commissioners and guests this evening to our monthly meeting of the Annapolis Human Relations Commission. The meeting is now formally in progress, and we are recording the meeting as we speak. We have considerably higher than a quorum. We've got a good turnout of commissioners this evening. As I mentioned earlier, that Commissioner Smith is out of town and won't be able to join us. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes which were transmitted to you by email? Any additions or corrections?
I move they be adopted, Mike.
Okay, all right. Chuck has moved that they be adopted. Is there a second for that motion?
I second it.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, those in favor indicate in some way by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So the minutes shall stand approved as discussed. It's been our custom here at the commission that when we do have a guest presenter, that we flip the agenda to allow that individual to make a presentation. I think it's especially important this evening because the observations that we're going to be hearing from our guest presenter will be used for the following item on the agenda, in which the commission is going to be asked to take specific action based on the suggestions and recommendations which we receive. Our guest speaker or presenter this evening is one of those individuals for whom you can say for certain that needs no introduction. Carl Snowden is, I think, the premier representative of the civil rights community here in Annapolis. I try to be stingy on superlatives, but Carl deserves all of them. He is currently serving as the convener of the Caucus of African American Leaders, but he's also has coordinated for years and years the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Awards dinner, and he also coordinated for quite a period of time the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Breakfast. In addition, Carl has served for a number of years, did serve for a number of years on Annapolis City Council, and had a very strong voice in support of civil rights. Carl, really appreciate your being with us this evening. I think I can safely say that you've got a lot of fans on the commission. We really respect the work that you have done over the years in terms of promoting civil rights here in Annapolis and more broadly in Anne Arundel County. So with the support of the commission, I would like to invite Carl to speak on the state of race relations in Annapolis and to put forward some specific suggestions to the Human Relations Commission regarding steps that can be made or taken to make progress in this area. So Carl, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, Michael, thank you so very much. And I want to first start off by thanking the volunteers. I know the Human Relations Commission is made up of volunteers. And quite honestly, the city of Annapolis and much of the progress we've made over the years has been because of dedicated volunteers. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for volunteering. And I also want to take this occasion to congratulate Judge Barber, who's going to be one of the recipients of the Martin Luther King Jr. Awards that the NAACP is giving at the annual Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Awards dinner, which is going to be this coming Friday. And she will be in the company of a very distinguished recipient. He won't be there in present, but you all will know who he is and you will understand the connection very quickly. The group voted to give a special award to the president of Ukraine.
Wow.
It turns out that if one pays attention to what's going on in Ukraine, you will discover that they're fighting two issues there. One, the preservation of democracy. Two, protecting their voting rights. Somewhere in America, somebody's saying it sounds familiar. Here in this country, people are fighting for preserving democracy and protecting voting rights. We thought it was very appropriate to connect with the president of Ukraine. We've invited the ambassador of Ukraine to come. And as you all know, they're very, very busy dealing with something called a war. But Senator Chris Van Hollen has agreed to accept the award in his place, and we'll see to it that he get it. World Events has a way of kind of just reminding all of us of what's really important. And one of the things I wanted to take a few moments to talk to the group about is an experience that I've had, and some of you may have had it as well. A number of years ago, I became a grandfather. And one of the things that I thought when I became a grandfather, I would spend all my time thinking about the good old days, things that used to be. I find myself increasingly focused on the future. What kind of world we're leaving for them to inherit? And the work that the Human Relations Commission goes right to this very issue. What kind of world do we want them to leave? Annapolis is changing very, very rapidly. And in my opinion, in many ways, very good. The demographics have changed. Some of you are now aware that Latinos are now the largest minority in the city of Annapolis, not African Americans, but the Latino community, as we deal with what Annapolis will become, as opposed to what it was. We've got to take in the fact that they're changing demographics. If one looks at what is taking place nationwide, look at the trends. By 2040, America as we know it will not exist. America will be a majority nation of people of color. That's just the way it is, 2040. That's not long from here. Mm-hmm. But when those changes come, with it comes obviously a reaction. And there is a force, I think, that exists in the country that is very much trying to prevent that from occurring, doing all kinds of things that are not in the best interest, I think, of the nation as a whole. I purposely have behind me in the photo of Trayvon Martin. Mm-hmm. The reason I want you to take a look at Trayvon Martin just for a second, you will remember, some of you will know the name, but people don't realize it's been 10 years since Trayvon Martin was killed. 10 years. It shows how much can happen in a short decade. And you think of what has happened from Trayvon Martin to the present, it really begins to give you some appreciation of what's happening in the country. I was in Ocean City a week or so ago for a part of a demonstration that was taking place. And some of you may have read last year, 4 Black youth were manhandled by the police. In fact, there's a trial that'll be taking place this coming Friday. And these young people, mostly males, 17 years old, 18 years old, were accosted by the police. They were eventually arrested. It was all caught on videotape. It was this huge controversy concerning it. And our group got involved. And I got a call from the police chief, who used to be in Baltimore City. He's now the police chief in Ocean City. And he asked me this question. Mr. Snowden, why didn't these young people just cooperate? He said. None of this would have happened. Nobody would have been arrested. They were allegedly vaping on the boardwalk. Vaping is against the law in Ocean City. None of this would have happened. Why didn't they cooperate? And I thought his question went to the heart of what we should be discussing this evening. If you think of these young men, 17 and 18, it means they were born in 2004 or 2003, depending on the age. Think of what has happened to these young people in the last 17 years, particularly African-American males. They have seen in their lifetime the following occur. In a place called Chicago, in a place called Cleveland, Ohio, a young Black boy is shot and killed at the age of 12 by police officers. In Chicago, a young teenager, 16 years old, is shot 16 times by the police and killed. In Trayvon Martin's case, he was 17 years old when he was shot and killed. Michael Brown was 18 years old when he was shot and killed in Ferguson. In Maryland, Antoine Black, who was only 19 years old, was shot and killed. In Baltimore, Freddie Gray was 26 years old when he was shot and killed. And then the whole world watched in 2020 as a man named George Floyd lost his life. What you will find in most of those cases, all of those Black people were cooperating before they were shot and killed. George Floyd was not resisting arrest when he died at the hands of the police. Neither was Freddie Gray or Antoine Black. So the mistake the police chief made was that he thought he was dealing with inexperience, conflict between Baltimore and these police officers and the boardwalk. And what he didn't realize was he's dealing with a decade of young people having to deal with the police. And oftentimes, even when they cooperate, they die. And so part of what I think the mission of the Human Relations Commission is to help people understand where we're going as a nation and as a city. There's an African proverb that I heard, which was quoted by Maya Angelou, and I think it speaks volumes. She said, the trouble for the thief is not how to steal the chief's bugle, but where to blow it. The trouble for the thief is not how to steal the chief's bugle, but where to blow it. It's an African proverb, and it essentially says that when you take something from people, what are you going to do with it after you take it? And so one of the things that I'm hoping that the Human Relations Commission consider doing is being a lot more active in holding public hearings, doing what you can do under the law. There's nothing that stops the Human Relations Commission, just as it doesn't stop the County Human Relations Commission from doing studies and issuing papers, followed up with recommendations. I'm very familiar with the history of both the city of Annapolis as well as the Human Relations Commission for Anne Arundel County. And a man named Chuck White, who was one of the first executive directors, wrote a paper that the County Human Relations Commission got when he first came on board. And shortly after he wrote this white paper, they fired him. Because what he said is, if we're going to deal with the problems of racism, we've got to start with our own house, Anne Arundel County. And I can tell you that was not appreciated by the powers that be. Chuck White left, but he left a document, I think that was very good 40 years ago, outlining what institutional racism, its impact and what must be done to change it. So here in the city of Annapolis, I'm sure all of you are now familiar with the fact that Alderwoman Finlayson passed a legislation that was unanimously passed by the city council, putting the city council on record as dealing with eradicating racism, discrimination of all kinds, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's homophobia, whether it is people who are discriminating against people based on their income, It's a very important piece of legislation that was passed, and it gives the Human Relations Commission, in my opinion, a great opportunity to work with the city in meeting the objectives that's outlined in this particular document. One of the things that you may not be aware of, that in the entire history of Annapolis, which was founded in 1649, it got its charter in 1709, that piece of legislation that was authored by Alderwoman Finlayson, it's the first time a resolution of that kind has ever been passed in the city's history. Think about that for a second. You will also discover by doing a Google that the history of the United States, of all of the kind of racist activities we've seen since the founding of the country, anybody want to guess how many resolutions been passed that condemns racism in America by the Congress? In the entire
zero.
Yeah, nope. In the entire history of the country, there's only been two men who have been condemned for racism in America. And both of them, one happened in the 20th century, another happened in the 21st century. The first one I mentioned to you, everyone will know it instantly because your memories will come back and you say, oh, I remember that. In 1984, Minister Louis Farrakhan was condemned for his anti-Semitic and racist comments. He referred to Judaism as a gutter religion. And the United States Senate went on record condemning him for those remarks. And the only other time in American history, and the first time in American history that the president's been condemned, was in 2020. Most people are unaware that the Congress passed a resolution condemning the racist remarks of then President Donald Trump. Let me pause there, give you time to absorb that. Most people live through it, you don't even know it. If you go and ask the average person, do you remember when Donald Trump was censored for his racist remarks? They won't know it. But if you Google it, you'll see that the Congress did it, and it did it based on these ugly remarks he made about 4 women of color. Said some horrible things to him, and the Congress decided that he had to be condemned. But never before had that been done in American history. And we know all of the various incidents that have occurred over the years. It has never been condemned. So what the city of Annapolis has done by affirming its commitment to fighting racism, I think gives the Human Relations Commission the moral tool that it will need to go forward. So, for example, one of the things I think the Human Relations Commission may want to consider dealing with is the following. Montgomery County has a law that's in place. It's one of the few laws in the country that does the following, in essence. It says that because of racism and because we know the effect of racism, that we should do for legislation what we do for the environment. Many of you know that before a project can be built in a city or town or a state, you have what's called an environmental impact statement. That environmental impact statement takes into consideration what will this do to impact on the environment. And it's a very good thing. It makes people stop and think about how it can impact on the environment. Well, they've created a system now. It's 2 of them. One exists in Montgomery County, and the basic concept is this: before we pass legislation, let's see if we can look through it and see what impact it has on communities from a racial standpoint. Let's see where the equity is in this. And it forces government to slow down, look at what is being proposed and what its impact would be. Now, to give you an example of Annapolis, had that law existed in Annapolis, something that has happened in Annapolis that is irreversible at this point, but it would not have happened had there been such a law, was what's called the Urban Renewal Program. Again, many of you may not be aware of this, but Annapolis in 1981 was officially found guilty, along with the housing authority,
Mhm.
of discriminating against Black people in the city of Annapolis. It was done by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, where they did a study and they concluded that under the Urban Renewal Program, as it was called, there was a deliberate plan. It was written about. In fact, you should look at the plan. It's really shocking what's in it. But the plan called for African Americans who at that time lived in what's called the Old Fourth Ward area, where the majority of people who were African Americans lived, to break up that community. That's their word, not mine. To break up the community and disperse these people along Forest Drive corridor. So when you look at Forest Drive corridor, and if you ever wanted to know why is it that African American communities exist along the Forest Drive corridor, if you study the history, you'll find out that those places began to be developed in 1970. And from 1970 all the way through the 80s, they began to build these particular housing developments along the Forest Drive corridor. And they all had one thing in common: one way in and one way out. And that's true to this very day. So decisions that are made by government bodies can have an illicit effect on a community. Zoning policies that people don't think about has a way of dividing communities and segregating those communities. And too often, when legislation is passed, people don't slow down and see what its impact's going to be. One of the things I salute the Latino community about, I told you they're the fastest growing minority in the city of Annapolis. And they've done some remarkable things in a relatively short period of time of being here. The African American community, if you look at the following, there's no African American banks in the city of Annapolis. There are no African American hotels in the city of Annapolis. And if I were to tell you that there was a time there were, you might be surprised. You might be surprised. There used to be African American hotels. And so if we're going to have a city that is going to be inclusive, we've got to have a process that allows that to happen. And by putting legislation in place, which this becomes your ultimate goal, you begin to measure whether the city's going to reach its goal of having an inclusive city. So the other thing I would ask that the commission consider doing is doing these white papers, looking at the city's makeup and looking at whether or not city services are being evenly distributed through tax dollars. A case in point is that if you look at where majority Black residencies are, and you look at where city services go, how money is allocated, you'll see the great disparity that exists there. And again, unless somebody pays attention to this, this becomes an ongoing problem. And you don't get the kind of capital projects that you need in these particular communities. So for example, something as simple as sidewalks. You determine by doing an audit which communities have adequate sidewalks and which ones don't. Law enforcement, which is a huge issue in our city. How are law enforcement distributed? There have been several lawsuits, as some of you know, that's been brought against the city of Annapolis, alleging racism in the police department. Some of this has been over the years, but a couple of them are fairly recent, where people have alleged that they've been treated differently because of their particular race and their color. And the one other thing I want to say just before opening it up to kind of having a dialogue rather than a monologue here is where I started at. Let's assume that you have children or grandchildren. What kind of world are they going to inherit when it's all said and done? And what are we going to to ensure that the world they inherit is one that is safe and free from bigotry. I think, and this is an editorial comment on my part, I think we're at a very dangerous time in American history. I happen to believe that these midterm elections are the most consequential of my lifetime. And I think the decisions that will be made, not only here in Maryland, but across the country, are going to be incredible in terms of what direction this country takes. Make no mistake about it, there is a backlash that is occurring all over the country. And we saw that particularly on what they call critical race theory, which is just a blue red herring that they put out, but it's effective because there are laws that's being passed in states that prohibit what they call critical race theory. And in one state, they define critical race theory as the following. And it's very dangerous, but it's law. Critical race theory, or the teaching of the history, is anything that would make white students feel uncomfortable, would be prohibited from being taught in public schools. Think of that for a second. I don't know about you, but I don't know how you can teach about the Holocaust and not be uncomfortable. How you can teach about lynchings and not be uncomfortable. How you can teach about what have happened to Native Americans and not be uncomfortable, or Japanese Americans who were interned in 1941. The premise that we can somehow ignore that history, I think, is very, very dangerous. And so the Human Relations Commission has a lot of work to do as we prepare, I think, the next generation for the new battles that in many ways are part of the old battles that have been fought, but they're going to have to be refought again and again. And I think the Human Relations Commission can, through its moral voice, be able to speak out on issues. So here are the specifics, very, very specific. One, I mentioned, look at the particular legislation in Montgomery County. Two, I've talked about doing white papers. But the third thing I want to really, really impress with you guys to think about doing. The Capital newspaper allows any group and any citizen the right to do op-eds. You can do up to 650 words per op-ed. And there are things that's happening in Annapolis where the voice of the Human Relations Commission should be heard. There are issues that have come up in the city of Annapolis where it's important. For example, in public housing, even as we speak, there are places that have not been inspected or licensed. And there's a long history around that, but it exists. The fact that there's been a proposal by Senator Seminar to prohibit critical race theory being taught in Anne Arundel County public schools would be an excellent opportunity for the Human Relations Commission to voice its opinion, if they believe, as I do, that is not what we should be doing to our students here in Annapolis, that students should have an opportunity to hear the true history of the country. Speaking up and speaking out and writing, I think is crucial so that the Human Relations Commission, our voice can be heard on these very important issues that's impacting on us. I take note, and then please tell me if this is not the case. I take note that there is this legislation, there's legislation that's being proposed all the time by everyone. And I don't recall the Human Relations Commission voicing a point of view on a particular piece of legislation. For example, the legislation that was introduced by Alderwoman Finlayson just seemed to me would have been a great opportunity for the Human Relations Commission in the op-ed to talk about why, and it's not too late now because they can still talk about even afterwards why that legislation is important. I think taking advantage of that forum would be so helpful, and it could educate so many people. In the city of Annapolis, I don't think many people know that the Human Relations, what authority the Human Relations Commission has. So you can use that forum as a way of educating them, the public, to what the Human Relations can do. So I'll stop there and see if there's any feedback.
These are very, very thoughtful suggestions, Carl, and I think you're going to find the commission's going to be receptive to each of the ones that you mentioned. I would just like to say just one thing is just a factual measure. I was not aware of the resolution introduced by Alderwoman Finlayson until after it was enacted, and only then, because it was listed as part of a very lengthy summary of past legislation that my alderman, Ross Arnett, routinely sends to everyone. I can't recall any coverage in the Capitol of that resolution. I think you can be certain that I can tell you, if I had known about that in advance, I would have gotten the support of the commission, and I certainly would have testified at public hearing in support of it. So I think that was one I would want to defend this. And the other thing I would mention is that the commission does stand up when we are actually made aware of a particular matter. An example is and this we'll touch on this tonight. The county council, as I'm certain you know, Carl, is meeting tonight to vote on the issue of the Police Accountability Board, which is part of the police reform package legislation that was passed. And very specifically, there was a group of concerned groups that wanted to put forward some amendments to the specific proposal that's being advocated by the county executive. And that person was the Reverend Marguerite Morris, and she was at our meeting last month. The commission signed off in support of that. We were one of the groups that supported this proposed change. So the amendments that they were putting forward. In fact, the Capitol actually mentioned us. We were one of the groups that were mentioned in the story. So I think the important thing is for folks to ring our bell, so to speak, because there are things that happen that we just simply don't care about.
Michael, here's a suggestion. As you know, I served on Annapolis City Council 12 years,
Right.
so I understand the process.
Right.
My recommendation to you would be to formally request the mayor, who is the one that assigns the legislation to various commissions and committees. They have a standing committee, and the mayor can refer and does refer matters involving the environmental commission, for example, to the environmental commission, or if it's a housing issue, to the housing issue. Well, there's no reason why you can't put in place a change so that whenever there's legislation coming up that impacts on the Human Relations Commission, that they would automatically refer to the commission for their review and comment. For example, the Sheila Finlayson legislation would have been ideal for that to have been referred to your committee. There's been other pieces of legislation. Ellie Turney put in legislation that apologized, for example, the lynchings that occurred. There's no reason why a simple letter going to the mayor saying that when legislation which impacts human relations, would you please refer it to our committee? And I'm sure he would do it. It's just probably haven't been asked of him. And that way the commission could be treated the same way the environmental commission is treated, where it automatically, anything that deals with the environment generally automatically goes to the environmental commission. Well, there's no reason it couldn't go to the Human Relations Commission.
I'll make that request within the next 24 hours to the mayor and also to Hillary Raftovich, who is the coordinator of boards and commissions. And so we'll just make that as a formal request. Easily done, and I think your point's very, very well taken. But I think we definitely want to do that. Yeah, Chuck.
Thanks, Mike. First off, Carl, I agree with your three recommendations. No surprise. And to add what Mike said, when Reverend Morris spoke before us, support for their stronger amendments was agreed to unanimously by
Mhm.
the coalition, by the commission. And when this ends tonight, I'm going to testify before the county council in full support of the recommendations of the Anne Arundel Coalition for Police Accountability. And also I testified against the Volkey bill in the county council, which was specifically to ban CRT, critical race theory. Of course, it's not being taught,
Right, yeah.
but and a lot of, there were a dozen people before me that said how terrible this was for education. And of course, they're right. And I got upstairs, this isn't about education. It's about fundraising. And, this was a way to stir the pot in a destructive way, cynically. And so I agree with you. We have to stand up and be counted because, and actually, I was particularly glad to hear you were honoring President Zelensky, because that's yet another horrible example that none of us are free until all of us are free. And you got to speak up.
And I should add, Michael, I don't know whether you know this or not, but under the proposed law that is being considered by the county council and likely will pass, it will give the mayor the authority to appoint somebody from the city of Annapolis
Right.
to that board. Well, again, there's no reason why the Human Relations Commission couldn't play a role in that. You should seek to have an opportunity to vet the candidates, because that's a very important appointment, to vet the candidates, to ask the kind of questions that the Human Relations Commission could ask, and then make a recommendation to the mayor, versus the Human Relations Commission have no role in it. And somebody gets nominated by the mayor. Nominees could certainly be sent to the commission for their review and recommendation. And it's a way of making sure that whoever goes and serves on that board take in consideration some of the issues that we've been dealing with in the city for some time.
I'd like to also, again, that's a good, excellent suggestion, Carl. I think that very clearly, I think we should be a little more proactive in terms of asking that the mayor share a lot of the stuff with us, which has not been done, at least in the last few years. I'd like to go back to your suggestions. I think all of them are really, really good. With respect to the suggestion that you have regarding the introduction of legislation that would ask that the city take into account the impact that specific ordinances or bills would have on the minority communities. How would you propose that we go about that specifically? Should we just, is that something that I should work with Alderwoman Finlayson on?
Well, first I would get a copy of the law.
Or should we simply go directly to the mayor on this? What's the best way of having that actually accomplished?
Well, what my suggestion is, why don't you get a copy of the legislation, the Montgomery County legislation that's been passed, and then and I tell you, there's another city, and I'm trying to think of it. I think it's in Minnesota, where they actually declare racism as a mental illness, a health issue, and it kind of changes the way that particular issue is looked at. But getting a copy of the legislation so that the commissioners could become familiar with that law. And if you were to Google the article, when it was put in place, there's a series of articles that was written in the Washington Post, because it's now part of the law in Montgomery County. Then having the commission take a look at it, study it, and then I get one of the alderpersons to sponsor it. Need to tweet it, so obviously it fits Annapolis. But that would be a great systemic change for the city.
Okay. With respect to the recommendation that you had in terms of looking at the city's composition and makeup, and whether there are services that are being equitably distributed among all people. I think it would be helpful if the commission could get some guidance on this, in terms of what specific legislation should we look at. You mentioned a couple. You mentioned law enforcement as one example. I think it would be helpful to the commission if we could get some specific suggestions on that. And one way that we could do that is to hold a public hearing in the city and solicit suggestions from organizations and groups within the community, rather than us going ahead and saying, okay, we think this is what we ought to be looking at, and going forth with that. I think we would want to get the views of a whole variety of different organizations and groups, including obviously the caucus of African American leaders, and I think that's one thing that we could and should do. There's one other issue I just mentioned to you, that the commission actually decided some time ago to hold a series of public hearings in each of the aldermanic districts in the city of Annapolis, and that was a direct result of the program that was sponsored by County Executive Pittman in February of 2020 about the presence of hate groups in the city. And unfortunately, the pandemic hit the next month, and as a consequence, city boards such as this were simply unable to hold public hearings. We wouldn't have in any case because of the dangerous spread of the virus, but we're not able to, because the city of Annapolis basically said they did not want boards and commissions holding public meetings. Everything had to be done over Zoom. However, I think now we're reaching a point where I'd say maybe in the next month or so, we can move forward on doing public hearings and actually holding them in the public square, because we certainly want to do it at a time when people will actually feel comfortable about turning out and not afraid that they're going to get the virus. But I think that we're certainly, as spring comes, this is something I think we would do. But I would like to certainly, before we make any recommendations on hate groups, to get the feelings of people in each of the wards of the city. And I think we could basically do the same thing with respect to your suggestion about, looking about the equitable distribution of city services, and hold a public hearing on that as well. And I think those would be two that we definitely should undertake. Now, with respect to, and again, you're talking about doing op-eds and things like that, you're absolutely right. The Capitol is especially now looking for people to write those things. If you haven't noticed it recently, the Capitol hasn't run a single editorial recently. They basically take things that are either, most of them are canned from syndicated columnists, but if someone writes an op-ed, the Capitol will definitely publish it. So I think that certainly opens an opportunity for us to do that. I would just make one other comment to folks, and this follows up on your comments, Carl, about the importance of the upcoming elections, and then your observation about the whole red herring of the critical race theory. The mathematics on county council are very clear. If you have a change in the county executive and a change in one member of county council, the kind of legislation you described will probably be enacted in Anne Arundel County. And probably because there's members of the council who support that, and There are people who are running for county council who would also support it. I think your point is very well taken.
Let me just share this, Michael.
Not engaging, I'm being very careful not to engage in electioneering. Boards and commissions of the city aren't allowed to do that. And so I'm certainly not making any judgments in terms of specific people, so I'm not mentioning any names. Except to say that we are very close to having an electoral distribution in the city in which something like that could very well pass the county council. And if you think, oh, well, the courts will protect us, well, maybe and maybe not. Maybe and maybe not. So your point's very well taken. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to follow up on that. And with respect to the hearing on hate groups, I had thought at one point, I think we should do this, but I say, I really haven't had this problem for quite a number of years. And then, of course, we had just an incident which occurred in the city with the distribution of anti-Jewish flyers, which were really nasty. Commissioner Leach actually learned about that, and actually learned about it before it appeared in the paper, because Commissioner Leach shared the information with me over email. We did reach out to the community groups that were impacted by it to let them know that we could provide them with some guidance as to what exactly they could do and couldn't do on it. So I'm going to stop there. And we're going to move on to item B on the commission. It says action by the commission in response to your comments, Carl. I'd like to get the thoughts and opinions of other members of the commission tonight regarding the suggestions that you've made. And then I'm going to actually, depending on what I hear, I'm going to formulate a suggested motion for the commission to formally vote on this and make this a matter of policy for this commission. So the floor is now open to comments by commissioners. Yes, Helen?
I'd just like to say I totally agree with Carl, and I've always been a little disturbed that we don't answer as a group to any of these horrible racial incidences, or even the scattering of the anti-whatever stuff that gets thrown around in people's yards. And if the only way to do that is through an op-ed, then I think you are the good writer, unless you would like to appoint somebody else. And I think we should try to get in there as often as we can when we're against these horrible issues that happen in the city. And we just haven't been doing that. And Carl's right. We really haven't.
Okay.
I had a question, and thank you for speaking, Carl. In terms of presenting or establishing or trying to obtain these white papers, to discuss or tell us what's in the city's makeup and how those services are being distributed, what is it that you think, or what is it that that those papers would discover, or because I'm assuming that you're somewhat alluding to that there are gross disparities between different neighborhoods or different elements of the city. What do you believe that would show? And then what can we potentially do with that information after we receive it?
Right. Let me thank you, Jay. One of the things that I think, particularly for people not Annapolitans, knowing the history of the city is really, really important. Jay, are you aware of why the district court is on Boulevard? Do you know any reason? Most people have no idea.
Down Fourth Ward buildings, I think, to build that.
Nope.
No?
Here's why, and then I'm going to answer your question directly. That's why it's so important, these public policies, that we really know the history of it. In 1976, a little black boy named Brian wanted to play football. At the time, what is now called the district court used to be the Elks property. The Elks owned that property.
Oh, yeah. I
And what
remember.
happened was they had a policy, and their policy was that Blacks couldn't join the Elks.
Yeah.
You couldn't become a member of the Elks. And so what happened was in Annapolis, we discovered there were private clubs that prohibited Jews, Blacks, and women from being members. You couldn't be a member. So when I was on the council, we passed legislation that prohibited a private club from receiving a liquor license if they discriminated based on those things I just mentioned. So it went all the way up to the Court of Appeals. It was upheld. By the way, Annapolis is the only jurisdiction in Maryland that prohibits liquor licenses going to clubs that discriminate. It's the only one. And so what happened was when the law got passed and upheld by the Court of Appeals, the Elks had a policy that women could not be a member, and therefore they would not be eligible to use their liquor license. So they moved from that location over to Edgewater, where they now are housed, because they didn't want to comply with the law. And that's why the district court is where it is today. Most people have no idea that's the chain of events that occur. So what generally is done with white papers is you actually go into partnership with, it can be a local community college or a St. John's College, where a person who has expertise in a given field will agree to, on behalf of the commission, actually do the research for you to see what the disparities are. And then the group decides, in order to address these issues, what specific recommendations would we make to the legislative body, which in this case would be the city council. And you list what those recommendations are. And hopefully a member of the commission, a member of the city council would agree to introduce the legislation. It becomes a great way of educating people, because a lot of people are not even aware of the disparities that exist in the city of Annapolis. There was a guy who was he did a similar study with banks in Annapolis, and he was able to document this huge disparity. He happens to be a doctor, PhD, and
yeah, he was a former chair of the Human Relations Commission.
right,
but I can't remember his name.
Yeah, doctor. I'm trying to think of it. Yeah, and he did a study. Didn't go anywhere because nobody did anything.
Cater. It was Cater, wasn't it?
Yes, that's what, very good, Helen.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Cater. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
okay.
in the city, there's a lot of people, who have all kinds of expertise, and a lot of retired people who, if asked to do such a study, would be willing to, do some time, invest in it. So partnering with either Anne Arundel Community College, partnering with St. John's College would be a way of getting the research done, and probably at no cost to the city.
There was one other organization that ran afoul of the discrimination policies. And Carl, you'll remember this, and I think your legislation dealt with it as well. And that was the Eastport Democratic Club.
Yes.
You know that? The Eastport Democratic Club also had a policy. I'm not making this up, right, Carl? They also had a policy, no minorities, no Jews, no women.
That's correct.
They also, I think, ultimately changed, but it was a struggle with them.
Yeah, I remember, Michael. I remember when a woman who was married to a member of the Eastport Democratic Club went and applied, and she was rejected because she was a woman. And what they did was, you vote secretively, but if you get any one black ball at the time, you were out. So nobody knew who put a black ball in or what have you. She had the dubious distinction of getting 22 black balls. And she called me. She was so angry. And Michael, you'll appreciate what she said to me. I was an alderman at the time. And Chuck, she said, Alderman Snowden, I could understand if I was colored, but they did it to me.
They didn't welcome our mayor in there.
That's
Pip
right.
Moyer was not welcome at the Democratic Club.
That's right.
Yeah,
So
but,
the law changed that.
Yeah.
well, it also changed things too, because the local Democratic Party hesitating very slightly. This goes back to the early 1980s. You got to remember the time. They hesitated for a while, but ultimately they basically disowned the Eastport Democratic Club. And
I
it
would
exists
love for you
today.
guys,
It
Michael,
exists
you might
today,
want
but
to
very
consider,
different.
Michael, you know what would be a great idea to consider now that the legislation has passed? There were 12, by the way, it may be more now, but there was only 12 private clubs in the city of Annapolis. And the Human Relations Commission could do a survey to see what the impact has been. I know, for example, the Annapolis Club that used to be all white and all male, and where all the judges were members of, have now changed. But it'd be great to, kind of look back and look at private clubs in the city of Annapolis. Obviously it's volunteer, whether or not, they have the racial mix, and see whether or not there are private clubs in the city that either by custom or still either all white or predominantly white. I know that's going to be true for the Yacht Club. I already know that you would do the Annapolis Yacht Club, but it would be interesting. And that's not hard to do. It's only 12 clubs. You merely send out a survey to the clubs, asking the clubs, we're interested in seeing what the racial makeup or the gender makeup of your communities is. Could you give us some sense? You don't need people's names. They would tell us, our club is 10% this or 12% that, or 0% women. We'd really be interested.
I thought the Annapolis Club lost their liquor license rather than comply.
No, it was the Elks Club. The Annapolis Club actually,
Oh, yeah.
the Annapolis Club actually did comply because, believe it or not, Judge Lerner was never a member of the Annapolis Club.
No.
Never invited to be a member of the
Of
Annapolis.
course not.
And the club was made up generally of lawyers and judges, for those who are not familiar with the Annapolis Club. And you couldn't join. You had to have someone who was a member invite you in to sponsor.
Exactly.
You. And so for years, certain people were not allowed to be a member of that club. Helen, are you aware of the fact that Phil Merrill, when he came to Annapolis, tried to join the Annapolis Yacht Club, and what they did to him?
They wouldn't even take him. But well, you know what happened with the Elks Club, don't you? Because it was a national edict that no women or
That's
blacks. Right. And as soon as they built that new building out there, the Nationals changed their mind. So.
Annapolis doesn't have a real good history, and you just mentioned the case of Phil Merrill, and he was no one's definition of a liberal, I can tell you right now. But one of the policies that he, once he bought the paper, he learned to his horror that the Capitol refused to run obituary notices for African Americans. Did you know that, Carl?
I did.
I didn't know that.
But the reason by the way, Michael, so you know it, the reason that, if you didn't know this, the reason he was not allowed to be a member of the Yacht Club, they discovered he was Jewish.
Yeah.
And he was blackballed.
Yeah.
Phil Merrill was Jewish. And when they found that out, they said, oh, nope. They gave him some excuse, and he was livid that they did that to him. By the way, if you have not seen this, I hope you guys really should take a look at. Are you familiar with the apology that the Capitol did on May?
Yes.
On June
and
21st?
The Sun.
Oh, good.
And you led the effort on that.
I mean, is all the commissioners aware of that?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if all commissioners are aware of it.
I don't know what.
It would be useful if they're not, for you to share with the commissioners.
I'd be glad. The Sun did an extraordinary, almost double page apology for the last 200 years.
And the Capitol did one as well.
Yes. And you've been working on that for 2 years, I know.
Yeah.
Well, having visited
Jay, have you seen that apology? Jay, did you see the apology? I was asking Jay,
no.
Have you seen the apology?
Yeah. I have not.
I think it might be helpful if, Jeremy, have you seen it?
Yeah, yes, I have. Yeah.
Both apologies, the one in the Capitol and the Sun.
I read the one in the Capitol. I didn't see the one in the Sun, but
Yeah, the Sun is very, very light, and you may want to take a look at that. But you know, that's another opportunity. I'll just say it again. Just a great opportunity for the commissioners to respond to this written apology that was in the Capitol, where the Capitol apologized for its treatment of African Americans. And Michael, what you just said, you'd be surprised how many people were unaware of that. That it was once a policy of the newspaper not to publish obituaries of African Americans. And little history here for those who don't know it. Anyone who is 68 years or older who were born in Annapolis, their parents were not allowed to go to Arundel Medical Center. They have their babies delivered. So a lot of people were
They
native
go to DC.
Annapolitans. No, DC or Baltimore. So you'll find a lot of people, birth certificates who are African Americans, actually who are native Annapolitans, but they were born in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins because they were not allowed, their parents were not allowed to birth.
Right. That was the birth of the Parole Health Center.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And thanks to Dr. Theodore
Alan.
Johnson.
Yeah.
No, Dr. Theodore Johnson is the one that founded
The first one, yeah.
Well, I would like to entertain a motion from the commission that it adopt the suggestions which have been put forward this evening by Carl Snowden and make this a matter of policy for the commission moving forward this year.
I'd so move.
Okay, all right, it's been moved by Chuck Hurley and we've got numerous seconds. Discussion. Any discussion? Okay, I'm going to take a vote. Chuck, do you have something you wanted to say?
No, it's just, we should do it.
Okay,
It's long overdue.
all right. Okay, I'm going to ask for a vote. Everybody, you do it by either verbally or by a show of hands, or you can do it through the reaction button. Zoom lets you do it a whole lot of ways. But those who are in favor of the motion, again, the motion is that the commission move forward to adopt and treat as a priority the suggestions which were made this evening by Carl Snowden. Motion's been passed and motion has been
One minor amendment made by the presentation by the Honorable Carl Snowden.
That's fine. All right, those who are in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any of those who are opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the minute shall note that the motion has passed unanimously by the commission. And Carl, we're going to move forward on this expeditiously.
Thank you
Really
so much.
appreciate it. I'd like to thank you for your presence tonight. And, the next item that we have on the agenda, you may be interested in as well. And that's an update on the advisory panel on police review board in Annapolis. And you've got two processes that are going on here. You've got, first of all, you've got the county, which under Maryland law, under the law that was passed, it's the county's responsibility to establish a police accountability board. The county executive is the driving force there. The proposal by the county executive does allow, as Carl said earlier, it does allow that there would be one representative from the city of Annapolis who would be appointed by the mayor with the approval of the city council. However, there's another process that's going on almost simultaneously within the city to create something which is very, very, very similar to this. And I would like to, I know that there's a committee that's been working on this. Will Rowell, I think, is the coordinator. He's the head of it. What they're trying to do is put together a proposal that they would present to the city council. Chuck and
Jay also is
on this panel. So I'd just like to hear where.
I was able to speak to Will tonight. There was a rally for the county council bill vote, and was able to speak to Will there tonight. He confirmed what the city attorney said last time, Mike, that the city will not have its own police accountability board,
Right.
but that he's going to keep the advisory panel together to consider other issues, including the selection of who the city representative is. And by the way, he's pushing to make it 2 representatives, not 1. But so far it is just 1. Jay, do you have anything? You may also know some stuff, Jay.
No, I don't know anything specifically. I just know that, and I assume that you're aware, Chuck, of these other or additional meetings that seem to be outside of the civilian review board, but now the police accountability. I think the ACLU has somewhat stepped in and requested, or at least additional representation to hear what's going on. I just have not had an opportunity to follow up with what they are also, but that I believe that's what Reverend Morris was representing when she spoke at our last meeting.
Yes, you're right. There is an Anne Arundel County Anne Arundel Police Accountability Board Coalition. I think I got that correct term. And you're correct. Of course, it's ACLU is a leader, as is Reverend Marguerite, and I happen to be a member now too. But they had a rally tonight to get attention towards the consideration of the bill and to strengthen the bill in a number of specific ways, so that the Police Accountability Board would have independent investigation authority, so it would be independent, and also there are about 4 or 5 major amendments which we all agreed to at the last meeting. So, as a matter of fact, I've been getting a text that bill is under consideration right now, so I'm going to have to leave to go testify on that if I can. Mike, can I raise an issue related to that, though, Mike?
Sure.
I'm testifying on behalf of myself in support of the recommendations of the coalition, the Anne Arundel coalition. But I'd like to be able to mention at least that I'm a member of the commission and that we unanimously supported the coalition's recommendation at our last meeting.
Absolutely. And you can testify on behalf of the commission. The commission.
Okay, I will. But I
last.
didn't want to presume that until I asked.
No, I mean, the commission voted at the last meeting, unanimous vote, to basically endorse it. And in the article, there was a lengthy article in the Capitol about this issue, one of the longest ones published.
Yes, it was.
And we were listed among the groups that was supporting it, and how that will be adopted. It would take, I think, either for the county executive to agree to integrate some of these suggestions into its legislation. I'm not sure he's going to do that.
I'm not either.
Based on, you'll recall that I reported last time that I was invited by the county executive staff to take part in a briefing session, and we were supposed to brief the county executive in terms of any changes we wanted to make. Well, that's not quite how that meeting was held. It was a dog and pony show. It was basically, here's our proposal, this is what we're voting on, and we hope everyone will agree. And there wasn't a complete agreement, but it was very clear that there wasn't a whole lot of interest on the part of the county executive staff to make major changes, even minor changes in his proposal. But it's possible that he might pick 1 or 2 to support, or there's a possibility that there could be a motion made from the floor to adopt 1 or more of these. And if it passed, then it would be integrated into it. It means it's ultimately the decision of county council. County council and the county executive are driving this train, pretty much. And that's because of the way the state law is worded. The state law says the county shall do the following. Cities are encompassed under the county. But yeah, I think you can definitely
Okay.
speak and just say you're here representing the Annapolis Human Relations Commission, which has endorsed the legislation. If you look at the minutes you've got from the last meeting, I included all 7 of the suggested priorities, the suggested changes. So you can, there were no items that varied. We did do it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sort of formalize what we all heard tonight. I took some notes on what Carl had proposed. I think there's we do want to, and we will move ahead on all of these suggestions. He made some really good suggestions there. And I think what he was saying is the commission needs to be more proactive and more visible. I think that's what I was hearing him say, and I think we can do that. We have one final item on the agenda tonight, and that's a report of the Human Relations Commission of Anne Arundel County. And Lakeisha is still with us. Lakeisha, would you like to make a report on what the county HRC is doing? And if you do, you'll need to unmute yourself. Lakeisha, are you there? I know she's there. Okay, well, I think we'll just have to move on then. Are there other items of business that commissioners have that you would like to introduce? There is one thing that I forgot to do. Having jumped ahead here, I did not go back to the beginning and ask Judge Barber if she had a report for us. Do you have anything you'd like to report for us on the liaison report?
No, I don't have any items to report from the Human Relations Office. We're continuing to do our duties of connecting with staff members as necessary.
Okay. All right. And my report's really brief. I would like to thank Josie Malavi, I hope I pronounced her name right, for serving as our tech coordinator for the Zoom call this evening. So I know you're out there somewhere, Josie, but thank you so much for serving in that capacity this evening. Okay, are there any other items of business that folks would like to bring to the commission this evening?
Actually, I don't have an item of business.
Okay.
I have an item that touched my heart very deeply. Mr. Snowden is no longer on the call, but I wanted to thank him for mentioning Ukraine. I wanted to thank him, and I'm very touched that they are going to recognize President Zelensky. And why is this important to me? Because I am first generation, born and raised in this country, Ukrainian. And yes, I do have family still there. So I want to say to Mr. Snowden, Dyakuyu and Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Glory to Ukraine.
Yes.
Well, I see that you're wearing a blue shirt this evening, and I'm actually wearing a yellow one. So between the two of us, we have the Ukrainian flag well represented.
Well, I have on my Ukrainian pen, and I did not wear my off-color Ukrainian T-shirt. Yeah, it's very off-color. So I Even though it's in Ukrainian, the words are bad. So I'll save it for the gym.
Well, I don't think you'd have found too many people in the city of Annapolis who would have been able to translate that, but you never know. You just never.
I was surprised how many Ukrainians are here ever since this happened, and how many showed up at the protest. So, yay, Slava Ukraini.
Well, thank you for those remarks. I'm going to make sure to capture that in the minutes, Rosemary. And I can only say that the overwhelming majority of Americans, I think, are really moved by the efforts underway to provide humanitarian assistance to what is, I think, is now 1.5 million people who are
1.7 as of tonight, Mike. 1.7.
Okay, all right. Okay, 1.7 million who have been forced into refugee status as a result of what is, I think, completely unprovoked war of terror against the people of that country. Okay, I think we've concluded our business tonight. I'd like to thank everyone for joining the call, and I will follow up on this. I may be in contact with commissioners on some of these things and get some assistance. But I think we can certainly move ahead in terms of I think increasing our visibility. I think Carl's suggestions were right on, and I think he's really supportive of the work of the commission. And so I think I'm really glad that he was able to be here tonight.
Mike, I'd be glad to track down that Montgomery County, statute that requires a racial impact statement.
That would be great, Chuck, if you could do that. And then I can make the referral back to the city on that, and see if we can get some legislation moving. And I think what I will do is I will send it to the mayor with a copy to Hillary, but I think I'm going to copy all members of the city council, on it, because that's all you need is one member of council to say, that's a good idea. I'll do that. And as for the other items, I think we're pretty close to being able to hold a public hearing on things. I really want to wait until the end of this month just to make sure we don't have any other surprise variants pop up. But I really think that we're close to a point where this is the virus will be something that will be more of a epidemic status and pandemic, and will not be as dangerous. With, of course, individuals who have got this various kinds of personal physical issues and medical issues that could require them not to take part, then that would be understandable. But I think we're pretty close to being able to do that. And I'm going to try to be aware of opportunities to do op-eds. I think that was a good suggestion made by Carl. If you write an op-ed, the Capitol's going to print it. I mean, they're really looking for copy. They've dramatically reduced the staff over there. And so I think if any of us decide if someone feels moved to do an op-ed, you can just share it, and then, we can get the commission pretty much to sign off on it. The person can write, as a member of the commission or whatever. And so I think we can certainly do that. So I think that concludes our business this evening, unless anyone else has any thoughts or opinions. And if not, we can declare the meeting to be adjourned.